GeneralsGentlemen.
Hello, and welcome to my second video for games that I find awesome. Today I'll be moving on to another RTS, which will be Company of Heroes 2, which for me is a pretty big deal. I absolutely loved Company of Heroes 1, and I played a fair bit of it, and ever since Company of Heroes 2 came out, it's been the game that I have been consistently playing the most. I've already clocked over 1,000 hours on Steam, and have hit the top 10 multiplayer leaderboards. So let's take a look. Company of Heroes 2 deviates from the standard RTS formula. The base building aspect is almost non-existent, and resources are not collected or harvested by certain units. Instead, income is passively gained over time, depending on the amount of resource sectors held. I think this is a great way of handling the economy, because it ensures that the game is always flowing and active. Instead of just sitting around building up an army, you always want to be securing additional territory or denying it to your opponent. There are different types of resource sectors, and each gives their own benefits, so you can customize and complement your own playstyle by prioritizing different types of territory. The main overarching theme that makes Company of Heroes 2 awesome is the incredible amount of compelling depth. There is an unrivaled level of detail into the profiles and statistics of all of the units and weapons. Everything has so many more layers of variables and attributes that you would come to expect from an RTS game. This results in a very complex system dictating very different ways of controlling each unit, weapon, and ability. Understanding and mastering all of the intricacies and nuances is essential for success. For example, the German Grenadiers are well-trained troops that come equipped with Kar 98K bolt-action rifles. Ideally, Grenadiers are positioned at a long distance away from their targets, because even at a long range, the Grenadiers are accurate enough to deal consistent damage, and whilst taking very little in return from their less accurate opponents and weaponry. Compare this to the Soviet shock troopers. They come equipped with short-range PPSH submachine guns. At long range, they will be completely ineffective, but if they are able to close the distance so that they are standing right next to their targets, they will be very powerful because of their high rate of fire. There are lots of other factors that will influence the micromanagement and the decisions of an engagement, but there is always one very important and integral factor that always needs to be considered, and that's the use of cover. In each and every map, there will be objects scattered throughout the battlefield. They come in various types and sizes, but they all achieve the same thing: protecting your infantry and vehicles from incoming damage. When units are positioned behind cover, they will benefit from a decrease in their received accuracy and damage. This varies on the type of cover. For example, standing behind a solid stone wall will offer more protection than standing behind a wooden fence. Though effective use of cover is not always an easy task, the majority of cover is directional. So if a squad of conscripts is standing in front of their sandbags, they will receive no benefit until they actually move behind it. This creates the awesome dynamic of flanking. Rather than attacking your opponent head-on, troops can be maneuvered so that they are attacking their opponent on a different angle where they are exposed and not protected by their cover. Outside of ignoring cover, flanking has a much larger part to play in Company of Heroes 2. Certain weapons such as the MG42 heavy machine gun have a limited firing arc. This means they can only fire in a certain cone in front of them, but this comes at the trade-off for being very powerful and able to suppress infantry targets. If the MG42 wishes to attack a target outside of its firing arc, the crew will have to pack up the gun, reface, set up again, and then target the infantry. This process takes several seconds to complete and can be very punishing. As a result, this places an absolutely huge incentive on flanking support weapons with a limited firing arc. This is the same for certain tank destroyers that don't have a rotatable turret, or even just flanking to expose the weaker rear armor that all tanks offer. The majority of micro in Company of Heroes 2 is not about your actions per minute, and is in theory quite simple. For the most part, you're just pressing right click to position and move your units around the map. But in every one of those move or attack commands, and in every one of those little right clicks, there needs to be so much analysis, understanding of the situation, and prediction of the enemy's movements. It's not something that you really appreciate after a while, you just naturally know what to do. But in every engagement, there's a subconscious level of thought that determine your decisions. It may be something as simple as just knowing when to retreat, or when to engage, or what to build. Whenever you make a good decision, react upon it with the correct play, and win the engagement as a result, it's a really rewarding experience and makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Due to the overall combination of mechanics that make up the infantry combat, such as weapon profiles, cover, flanking, suppression, grenades, mines, area of effect, and so on, it means that an army much smaller than your opponent's can still be victorious through good micro, positioning, and synergy. As a result, Company of Heroes 2 is rarely dull, because there's always the potential to come back from being on the back foot. This is also because Company of Heroes is a game of soft counters, meaning that pretty much every unit has the potential to kill or at least damage any unit in the game, so you can be creative and make the most of unexpected situations. Two armies with the exact same composition could clash multiple times throughout the game and yet have a very different dynamic and result each time. This gives each match a sense of unpredictability and keeps the stakes of each engagement quite high, whilst removing a sense of helplessness to the losing player as well as the sense of security to the winning player. Some other RTS games really can suffer from this mentality, and it has the potential to really suck the fun out of it. In a similar fashion, this removes the sense of repetition and monotony that certain RTS games can suffer from. Even if you're using the exact same units and strategies over and over again, no game of Company of Heroes 2 ever really feels the same. And that's due to its reactionary nature and the depth of unit interactions, dynamic, and synergy. This aspect is also quite supported by the influence of RNG. RNG stands for Random Number Generation, and this essentially refers to any chance or luck within the game. This is a pretty big influence for Company of Heroes 2 due to all of the calculations in the engagements. This includes the chance to hit, chance to penetrate, the scatter, area of effect, and so on. RNG, in theory, sounds like a bit of a flaw within the game, because then it has the potential to win entire engagements due to luck, rather than the player's skill or input and leaving them quite helpless. But when playing enough of Company of Heroes 2, you'll soon realize that this is rarely the case, due to how many influences and techniques can be used to put you in the better position and put the odds in your favor. Good skill and micro will always trump over RNG. The reason why I like the factor of RNG in Company of Heroes is because it draws in a sense of tension and captivation as a result of all of the uncertainty. If the outcome of an engagement is 100% predictable, then it really can lose the excitement and become rather dull. Another big mechanic that adds a lot of fun and tension into Company of Heroes 2 is the true line of sight. Infantry and vehicles have a certain vision range, as you would expect, but they are not able to see around corners or behind large objects that would intuitively block vision. This is designed to replicate the vision of those units from a first person's perspective. So every time a squad walks around a building, there could be a machine gun emplacement or assault infantry waiting to gun them down. A tank chasing down a wounded vehicle could be baited into a mine, disabling its engine and leaving it easy prey for an anti-tank gun waiting in ambush. You always have to play smart and be absolutely on the ball, because Company of Heroes 2 leaves little room for inattentiveness and making mistakes. The next thing that I want to talk about is the awesome visual and audio fidelity that Company of Heroes 2 has to offer, and how it's just so far ahead of any other RTS game on the market. In this video series of games that I find awesome, I'm not really too concerned about the quality of the graphics or audio, because this is from the perspective of how fun and how much I like to play these games from a competitive multiplayer perspective. For the most part, the artistic side of things doesn't really affect that. There's the gameplay and then there's the graphics, two separate and independent aspects of the game. But one of the real strengths of Company of Heroes, both 1 and 2, is that this separation isn't really the case. The visuals, audio, and the mechanics of the game itself are all rather intertwined to create a really enthralling and captivating game experience. When you fire up a game of Company of Heroes 2 and slap on your headphones, you're not really just listening to the game, you really are jumping into the battlefield and being absorbed by it. The incredible quality of the sound effects have so much depth and scope. The voice acting is very impressive and it's well complemented by the epic orchestral soundtrack. But it's more than just aesthetically pleasing, the audio ties into the gameplay mechanics itself. With careful observation and perception, listening into the background noise of the battlefield can reveal certain movements and actions of the players. For example, all vehicles in the game have a distinct engine noise, so it's not only possible to hear an enemy vehicle approach through the fog of war, but with enough practice it's also possible to distinguish what vehicle and the exact location and direction. This is very important because it allows for preemptive adjustments. If you hear a tank coming, you can reface your anti-tank weaponry, retreat vulnerable units, and just make sure you're well prepared. The list goes on of other things that can be heard through the fog of war and reacted upon as a result. This includes infantry footsteps, a barrage from a mortar or howitzer, rifle grenades being fired, the refacing of support weapons and AT guns, territory being captured, structures being constructed, and so on. It really adds to the immersion that there's so much happening and that you always have to be on the ball paying attention because you are in a battlefield and not just a little square box on the screen filled with things that you can see and surrounded by blacker bits of fog of war that you can't see. A similar effect is achieved through the fantastic graphics and visuals. The game just simply looks amazing. Everything from the terrain to the models and the effects. Not just the raw graphics itself, but also the animation quality is excellent. The infantry movement looks and feels quite real, especially because of how they react to the battle waging around them. For example, infantry squads will duck from cover to cover and drop to the ground when bullets start flying their way. It makes them feel as if they are real soldiers and not just units in a game. But once again, the visuals and animations tie into the gameplay itself. In every action in the game, there is an intuitive display representing it. For example, when a squad is throwing a grenade, it can be seen and predicted and therefore avoided. The soldier will drop his rifle and stand up. He'll grab a grenade, pull the pin, and throw it towards the enemy. When a machine gun team is setting up, there is a clear animation to display it. The MG is placed down onto the ground, secured onto the tripod, ammunition is then loaded in, it aims at the enemy and then starts firing. Every action in the game looks and feels real and authentic, as well as giving you an accurate and reliable indication of the timer and delay. But it's even just the finer and less obvious details. When a tank is firing, you'll see the shell explode out of the barrel alongside a cloud of smoke as the tank is kicked back from the shot. The shell then flies through the air towards its target, whilst the player stares in an instance of mesmerization, hoping that the shell finds its mark upon the hull of the enemy tank. And if it does, it's met by a huge clunk of impacting metal, with sparks and smoke emerging from the impact. In another instance of anticipation, the effect on the tank becomes clear. Does the shot penetrate through the armor, dropping the tank low and with the force of the impact recoiling it back violently? Or does the shell just bounce off unharmed? Does the engine ignite, crippling the tank, or perhaps the main gun destroyed and disarming it? The variation and unpredictability in engagements builds that sense of tension and draws you in, causes you to follow and appreciate the animations and effects, rather than just ignoring them because you know exactly what's going to happen. Whenever an enemy tank is destroyed, it looks and it feels awesome, and it really adds to the experience of the game. The game is relatively new, having been released not even a year ago, and in this time it has already received an impressive amount of updates that have fixed a lot of issues. For that I really am grateful and admire Relic for their hard work and their ongoing commitment to improve the state of Company of Heroes 2. If I was making the same video 10 or even 6 months ago, I would have so many more negatives to say compared to what I do now. The issue that I have chosen to talk about is the complete lack of any observer or live spectator mode. This is rather important, and it just makes no sense to not have this on launch, let alone a year later. Live spectator mode is so crucial because it allows so much content and events from the community. Company of Heroes 2 is lucky to have such a passionate and a dedicated community, though our potential isn't being embraced, and instead it's being limited. With spectator mode, we'll see more tournaments, more live streams, and more YouTube content. Everything will be more accessible, and the streams and tournaments that we do have will be easier and better. This is ultimately really important for getting new players on board and getting involved with Company of Heroes 2, as well as being paramount to the overall longevity of the game. To top it off, it'll also help open up the doors for Company of Heroes 2 as an esport. There's a really well written article by Ami Palizifunk. He's the host of Sunday Night Fights and admin of ko2.org. It's called 10 Reasons Why We Need Observer Mode Now. That's linked in the description and it's an awesome read, so go check it out. On a similar note, the lack of advanced replay tools limits the potential for creating interesting content. I myself have made several montages for Company of Heroes 2 and they've all been rather well received. But the amount of time investment required is just absurd because of how lacking the replay tools are. With no ability to skip or rewind a replay, and with only a fast forward of ×8, it can take hours to record some basic footage in a tedious and frustrating manner. Content producers are literally free marketing and advertising for the game. We should be given all of the tools and opportunities to do so. With better replay tools, there'll be much more content floating around, and definitely from a wider variety of people. Regardless of all of its flaws, Company of Heroes 2 definitely is my favourite RTS game at the moment, and to this day I still continue to sink a large amount of time into it, both playing it and casting it for my YouTube channel. To quickly sum up why I like Company of Heroes 2 and why I think it's so awesome, it really comes down to the huge amount of compelling depth in the strategy, tactics and micro. It has a lot of excitement and tension due to the uncertainty and unpredictability of a soft counter style, with lots of factors that affect how engagements are handled and alongside a high RNG influence. It's very fast paced and it's a very active game style that doesn't get old and repetitive due to its variation in gameplay dynamic. Lastly, to top it off, its visual and audio fidelity is just simply miles ahead of any other RTS game on the market. I definitely would recommend Company of Heroes 2, but even if you're not that into competitive 1v1 matches like myself, there's actually a lot of fun to be had with team games from 2v2s up to 4v4s. I'm not a huge fan of team games myself, but I definitely can see the appeal, and I do indulge myself every now and again with some friends and have a fair bit of fun doing so. But anyway, that'll wrap this video up. I am the machine of the GeneralsGentlemen, and I'll see you next time.